Alright, what's up everybody? This is Brian, aka Digit. I really did not intend on making review videos until I had officially launched the rebrand, but you know what? The feedme self-titled album is out and I have thoughts. So fuck it, we are putting out this content and we will figure the rest out later. I have a Manhattan in hand. If you are of legal drinking age, you might want to grab something similar because I honestly don't know how long I'm going to ramble for. If you're of legal drinking age. So, anyway, this album has been highly anticipated by me. I don't know how anticipated it was for everybody else, considering that he only announced it like, what, 2 weeks ago at the time of this recording? I mean, he was tweeting about a new album like months ago though, so I guess it's fair to say that this was pretty anticipated. And feedme has been one of my personal favorite electronic artists like since his first album, so pretty much every time he releases it's like an event for me. I imagine many of you watching may feel similar. And due to the manner in which John Gooch, the man behind the feedme project, has spoken about this album and its self-titled nature, I was really hoping for a very cohesive and polished vision on this album, which is something that, despite feedme's sound being among the most unique in EDM, isn't something we've always gotten from his past releases. So I am very happy to say that, with the exception of 1 or 2 tracks, that is indeed the case here. I mean, this album is just stacked with some of the most chaotic and menacing electro house I have heard in quite a while, possibly ever. But to be fair, not the most chaotic and menacing EDM I've heard this year. That title is going to have to go to the Varian remix of Insane by Apache and Tech9. But I can see why John, can I call you John, has said that this project is the most feedme he's ever felt. This definitely sounds like the most unfiltered version of the feedme sound that we've heard. It really does feel like, for the first time, we've really gotten a glimpse into the mind of this character. And I can also see why almost no singles were released from this album. With a few exceptions, this collection of tracks really feels like it's meant to be experienced as a unit, which is rare in EDM, because like pop, it's very much a singles game, and so, I mean, props to John for really crafting an LP here. So I guess we'll start with the opener and work our way down from there. Alright. It took me way longer than it should have to figure out why this one was called Big Kitten. John said in an interview that this song is kind of like the big glam rock overture, and I see it as not only that, but really just a microcosm for the whole album in general, in that this song, like the album itself, is at its freshest and most interesting when it's only taking cues from EDM genres specifically instead of outright conforming to them. I honestly think that the drop is the weakest part of the song. It feels like a fairly straightforward resampling of the sounds that he already established in the intro. And it just feels very plotting. Like, I see what he was going for, like very in your face, but the arrangement of sounds here really just lacks the forward momentum that you kind of want from an electro house track in this style. There are a lot of little bass and sound design fills kind of inserted between the main cat sounds. Did he really sample like a cat for this? But I really don't think they're adding much here. You really want each of the little sounds to flow into each other and push the song forward, and it just doesn't quite feel like they have that cohesive rhythmic momentum here. The intro and interlude, on the other hand, are really something to behold. The second half is just this big build, like really letting the composition take center stage with a new chord progression, a really sweeping synth solo over the top, and then those classic feedme basses start hitting, interacting with the resampled cat noises with a lot more rhythmic interest. That's a brand new sentence right there. And then just brings it home with these chromatically ascending piano hits, slowing down the tempo, really selling just the Baroque melodrama of the whole thing. And the fact that the whole song is just built on these like tuned cat noises just gives it the right amount of self-aware irony to keep it sounding fresh. We have a good bit of this to get through. I will try to keep having fun. Alright, Blanket Ban. So this is the shortest song on the album, and I think it's the one that feels the most unfocused conceptually. The melodic ideas, like the main bass riff and some of the synth lines, have potential, but don't really get developed much beyond how we initially hear them. The collection of sounds that's been assembled here really does sound like Feed Me, but the riffs and melodies themselves kind of sound like they could have been conceived on any instrument, rather than something that could only exist in the context of this album. More on that later. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. We do get a little bit more development in the last 8 bars or so, with some more kind of rhythmic guitar chugging that trades off with the initial bass melody, and it really feels like the song is finally starting to go somewhere with these ideas, but then it just kind of ends. The song as a whole just feels like it could have used a bit more development and polishing from a songwriting perspective. I mean, obviously the production is as focused and creative as ever. It's deliberately glitchy and imperfect without compromising the mix itself, which is hard to do. It's not bad by any means, but considering the fact that it's kind of sandwiched between 2 songs that are a lot more memorable and carefully structured, I think unfortunately it's destined to be one of the more forgettable tracks on the album. Not gonna lie, when I first heard this I was a little disappointed by it. As synthwave songs go, it's pretty good, but nothing about it really screams Feed Me to me, whereas most of his songs most definitely do. With the retro synth arps combined with the electric guitar and bass and these airy vocals that are drenched in reverb, kind of buried in the mix, it feels like a very organic marriage of like synthwave and shoegaze. However, and I had to do a bit of research here because I'm not that well versed in synthwave or shoegaze, to be honest, I don't think this song really brings anything super new to either genre, but it is the most effective, cohesive, and well-written synthwave track that I personally have heard. Again, my knowledge is pretty limited on that front. And I think the shoegaze influences are more prominent here than they are on other synthwave tracks that kind of borrow similar characteristics like the airy vocals. The guitars and electric bass in this one really do stand out in that respect. And I think this is one of Tasha Baxter's best vocal performances as well. I mean, her voice just suits the song perfectly, and her delivery is spot on for the vibe that they were going for. I guess I could talk about the lyrics, but they're kind of taking a backseat to all the synths and effects, so I think a deep lyrical dive is probably missing the point. I do like the concept though. I know John said this is kind of a quarantine tale, so in the context of that, the song is very relatable, and that relatability really adds to the immersiveness, which is super important for a song like this, which is all about the vibe. Now that my expectations aren't really playing a part anymore, and I can kind of evaluate the song on its own merits, I think it would have made a pretty good, like, one-off single, not really connected to anything else. I feel very strongly that it doesn't belong on this album, though. I think you could remove it, and the overall track-to-track flow would be greatly improved. Like, transitioning right from Blanket Ban into Cost a Fiver Had a Tenor would have been a much smoother flow, in my opinion. And speaking of which... Segway! So you know how, like, white American people nowadays, when they see, like, a Spanish word, will make a point to pronounce it in, like, an accent as a kind of, like, a show of respect to the culture? Like, they'll say reggaeton instead of reggaeton. I can't roll my R's, I'm sorry. In a similar way, I feel like the title of this song is just something that has to be said in a British accent. Otherwise, what are you even doing? And I think that with this stretch of like 4 or 5 songs that we're starting to get into here, this is where the album really hits its stride. And this song especially excites me the most for the future of Feed Me, whatever that may be. Because this is the track that shows the most willingness to kind of break away from the rigidity of the EDM genres that Feed Me has worked in for so long. This song doesn't really have like a consistent melodic through line, but for this song, I think that actually works better, and I'll tell you why. So in an interview, John said, "I love setting equipment up where it's on a knife edge between function and chaos, knock the table and it's gone type of thing. The bass line is the only part written, there's no MIDI, the rest was the machine's own idea. When it started fizzing and spitting, the rest of the track wrote itself." And if the Feed Me character is imagined as like some kind of gremlin in the machines that are being used to make this music, then just kind of letting the synthesizers do their own thing and glitch out and take the composition just wherever they want is probably the purest expression of this artistic project. In the first half, you have these bass lines that are kind of made up of all these different glitchy synth sounds just playing off each other. There's not even really like too much of a discernible key signature. Contrast that with the main bass line in Blanket Band. This really does sound like it was written by a computer. And then the second half of this is really just the highlight of the album for me. After a quick melodic interlude, the tempo slows down and starts speeding up again, getting more and more frantic as it goes on. You have this new melody and chord progression that doesn't really conform to the standard 4 or 8 bar structure, and the low end just becomes this really monstrous, roiling thing that gradually takes over as the song builds to a climax and then ends. This song, more than any of the rest, really feels like its own genre, rather than something that fits into, say, like electro house or that like Rez-influenced mid-tempo type style. And I hope that in future Feed Me releases, this is the direction that John decides to explore, because I think it's easily the most interesting and original track from a compositional perspective on this album. My drink is gone. Time to go get another one. So from there we get Night Boat, which feels like much more of a laid-back jam type of tune with the slower tempo, swung groove, and the fact that it keeps a pretty consistent bass line and chord progression throughout. And those little guitar, electric bass, and sound design inserts that kind of punctuate the main bass line work a lot better here than they do in Big Kitten, I think. They really do add a lot to the overall groove of the thing, and they have a nice call and response dynamic with the main bass sound, which only gets better and better as the song develops and the bass line gets more and more rhythmic. And the little filter sweep wah bass sounds that occasionally kind of appear as little rhythmic fills seem like a very tasteful modern successor to those like siren-ish sawtooth wah sounds that were super popular in like 2012 and 2013 EDM, but sound very dated and garish when you go back and listen to them now. And the fact that the chord progression does, for the most part, stay the same, I think is a strength of this one. It makes the overall structure of the thing feel tighter and kind of gives it legs to stand on its own as a song rather than just a piece of the album. And if there'd been other singles released before the drop of the full album, I think this might have been a good choice. If it bounces. I mean, this is just classic Feed Me right here. Like, we've heard similar songs from him kind of in this style before, like Chainsmoker and Beans Baxter. That kind of stripped back, very light on melody, electro house that's really just about the way that the bass and the drums interact with each other. And the way that those two elements combine here to create more than the sum of their parts is just perfectly done. It's just this rolling beat that's bouncy but relaxed at the same time. In the same way that Reckless creates a very distinct retro vibe by putting together these specific synth sounds and vocal effects, this one creates such a cohesive and polished groove that it just forces you to dance in a certain way when you hear it. I'm sorry that y'all have to see my dancing, but I feel like I have to do it for the entertainment factor. Let me know if it was worth it. If you're out here trying to make music that's danceable, in any genre really, this is going to be a song worth studying and referencing. Things like the attack and decay of the bass sounds on different rhythmic stress points, how much or how little high end is in the different bass sounds in order to support the overall flow of the rhythm, how it's layered with the percussion. Stuff like that can translate to any instrumentation really, and it's worth studying those fine details because this is clearly the product of someone who has mastered his craft in this area. If you're looking for straight ahead like electro house, doesn't get better than this. It's why he's the best. It's why he's the best. Stupid small face. Halfway through. I'm eating Milano cookies now. Lord, give me the strength. So this is another mid-tempo track that's based primarily around one bass line, and I really just love the way that the melody develops in this one. He gradually adds on like these higher synth layers and feedback spikes that harmonize with the original melody and kind of peak at the same rhythmic stress points that the original melody does. So even as it gets more chaotic, it's still recognizable as being derived from that original bass line. And at around a minute in, he just does something that I love. He drops out all of the high-end layers and puts the main melody just in the sub. That's one of my favorite ways to develop a melody, and I don't hear it all that often, so I was so happy when I heard it here. In the B section of the song, which happens around a minute 15, I think, has this really nice build to it, which just provides the right amount of contrast, because the main melody itself is kind of this static loop, and it just transitions so smoothly back into that A section riff. And also those guitar chugs that are heard throughout that just like sound like somebody screaming. It's a great example of high-level sound design that really serves a musical purpose instead of just existing for its own sake. From a songwriting perspective, this is definitely another one of my favorites from the album, for sure.
Frazetta.
Frank Frazetta. I'll be real with you. I had to look up who that guy was. I did not understand the reference off the top of my head. So this kind of left field sampling is another thing that I think you can really only get from a feedme release. So of course this one's going to be memorable simply because you have this voice just continuously whispering
Frank Frazetta.
into your ears. And I love how the instrumental and the interlude kind of mimics the cadence of that spoken Frank Frazetta as well. And then he kind of brings them both together in that last build-up. It's a great creative way to develop that hook, and it's definitely my favorite part of the song. This is another one, though, where I was kind of underwhelmed by the drop, honestly. It feels very empty. Like, there's definitely no shortage of weird little sounds in there, but the way that they're mixed, they kind of all just blend into the general background texture. And I'm all for having that space in your song. Nothing against that. I just don't think in this case it added very much musically. I didn't really feel the connection between the drop and the repeated like Frank Frazetta spoken word motif. And because that repeated phrase is definitely the strongest hook in the song, it's the most memorable part. I really think more could have been done to ingrain that into the fabric of the song itself instead of just having it kind of sit on top as like this gimmicky sample. Hey, what's up everybody? Continuity error here. I tell you what, there most certainly have not been any unexpected pauses or breaks in the filming of this video, because my cheap-ass tripod definitely did not just randomly crack apart and break in between takes. And I absolutely would never ever use my out-of-town roommate's much more expensive-looking tripod without his permission. Moral of the story is, this is a piece of shit product. Do not buy it. Oh my fucking god. And there are some motherfuckers jamming in this fucking apartment building at like the wee hours. Go to fucking bed. Fuck Berklee College of Music. Fuck Berklee College of Music. Anyway, we still have like 4 more tracks to get through, so the show must go on. So when I was first listening to the album through, my first impression of this one was that it seemed very out of place in the context of the songs around it. And now having listened to it a couple more times, I do think that this is probably the album's biggest misstep. I imagine that the like soft pop vocal stylings were probably meant to be kind of a reprieve from the aggressiveness of the tracks that came before, but I honestly think that they really do just sound out of place. And I don't think that Height's vocals gel nearly as well with the instrumental as like Tasha Baxter's do on Reckless. The lead vocal kind of sounds like it's competing for attention with the instrumental, as well as with the layers of background vocals that only really increase as the song continues. And the overall rhythm of the bass and the rhythm of the vocals just don't quite sound like they're really matching up and supporting each other.
Play on my beating heart. Your fingers on my lifeline. Getting older is getting crazy.
The whole thing just feels very convoluted to me. Although it's really a testament to John's production that on an album this chaotic, this is the only time that I really feel that way. It's too bad, because I mean, we know that the feedme sound can really be integrated into pop music in really nice ways. I mean, we've seen that with his work with Crystal Fighters, to say the least. I just don't think that this is the best example of that. And honestly, I think that with how aggressive the rest of the album is, this wasn't really the place to try to go for that again. Yeah, so if Big Kitten was like the glam overture for the album, then this is definitely its climax. It has that same Baroque, melodramatic feel to it. It starts out with these big, like, faux orchestral impacts. It really just kind of brings the album full circle. And when the intro fades out and that big electro bass line just starts to filter in, you know some shit is about to go down. Then you get the harmonies and those classic feedme pitched up vocal chops, and then when the beat drops, it's just everything you want from an electro house song, and everything you want from a feedme song. The melodic motifs and the bass and the vocal chops are super strong, and then when they all kind of come together at once and there's this big synth solo just dancing over the top of it, it's just woo! My only complaint is that the whole process only takes like 3 minutes, and the song is 5.5 minutes, so it basically just loops back around and does the whole thing twice, which feels like a bit of a cop-out from a writing perspective, because I think that this kind of build is always more effective when you can kind of stretch it out over the runtime of the entire song. It's really hard to do, but when you can pull it off, I mean, there's nothing like it. Midnight Runner by Pendulum comes to mind. Although I can't really complain all that much, because like I said, it really does just give you everything you could possibly want from a feedme release. And like I said, it serves as a very fitting climax for the album. one, Feather Crown. So this is another one that I wasn't crazy about on first listen, but as I kind of put it on repeat more and more, it's really grown on me. I think I like the song, I'm just not 100% sold on its placement in the context of the album. Because the ending of Tamp, Tamp, Tamp is just so climactic, and then this one goes in a totally different direction fairly quickly, so it feels more like an addendum than a closer. And it doesn't really help that the last build-up feels super climactic, but then it just kind of fizzles out, and then the last drop doesn't really do a lot to differentiate itself from the other two. Especially that being the last thing that we hear on the album, I think it really could have used something a little bit more climactic to end on a stronger note. Really say, like, yes, this is the ending. Like I said, it just kind of fizzles out. Between that and the fact that this kind of future bass style that it has isn't really supported by anything else on the album either. That being said though, the drop of this song has a really good sense of musical phrasing and call and response, which I think is missing from a lot of drop-based music nowadays. It's something that a lot of the older Knife Party tunes do really well also. And I think that that musicality is something that really separates the best drops from the mediocre or not great ones. And again, it has that future bass aesthetic, but it's not really content to just stick with the standard future bass melodic dubstep trope of just chord, chord, chord. This one, like most of feedme's music, is based more on a collection of little melodies and melody fragments kind of interacting and playing off of each other, which is always 100% of the time going to be stronger and more memorable than just block chords. So that's something that aspiring producers can really take note of as well. So is this his best album? That is the question, isn't it? As in, like, cohesive artistic statement? I would say easily yes. But is it his strongest album-length collection of songs released all at once? I might still have to give the edge to Big Adventure over this one. And by the way, if y'all want to see me do a deep dive on Big Adventure, please let me know, because that's one of my all-time favorites. So I've read in Eric Beale's book, The Billboard Guide to Writing and Producing Songs That Sell, that essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, people who make music kind of fall into two categories. People who write art music are writing purely as an expression of themselves. Audiences be damned. Like, it's only about the artist, nothing else matters. Whereas people who write pop music are trying to communicate emotion to the biggest audience, the biggest market that they can. It's about communication rather than self-expression. So this album is definitely a giant leap in the direction of self-expression for John Gooch. And I think that for feedme's solo releases, that's the direction that should really be explored as deeply as possible in the future. Save the pop crossover stuff for like remixes, although actually, now that I think about it, if you want to just do like a full pop album, I would actually be very down. And I agree with John that this album is probably the purest expression of the feedme sound that we've gotten so far, but to me it doesn't sound like the purest expression that there can be. And I'll tell you why I say that. The majority of these songs sound like genres that we kind of already know run through a feedme filter turned up to 11. Whether that's electro house with like If It Bounces, Frank Frazetta, Big Kitten, or that res-ish mid-tempo style with Stupid Small Face, Blanket Band, Nightboat, or even future bass with Feather Crown. And that's kind of what we've been getting for the past 10 years, is like feedme's take on these genres that already exist. It's just become more and more polished and focused. And I really do think at this point that the feedme sound has outgrown the genre that birthed it. I really don't think there's anything left to explore with electro house, dubstep, etc. And to his credit, there are very few EDM artists whose artistic vision has matured to that point. Like Koan Sound is probably the best example. Every one of their newer releases is kind of just its own genre, whereas all of these songs fit pretty comfortably into genres that already exist. So when you listen to this album and you hear the stylistic trappings of electro house kind of all over it, it honestly feels limiting. Like, we've heard the unfiltered Feed Me sound at this point, but I feel like we have yet to experience its source, if that makes any sense. Which is why the freeform chaos of cost a $5 have a tenner feels so goddamn exciting. That's the song out of all of them on the album that feels the closest to being its own genre, like a real Feed Me original genre. And I think that if there are any more Feed Me releases, that's the direction that they should explore as deeply as possible. Like, get on some real square pusher type experimental shit. Don't worry about making people dance anymore. Because I mean, Feed Me has been at the top of his game for like 10 years at this point, and John Gooch has been around even longer, so he has nothing to prove at this point. I think we all respect him enough that he can really get away with challenging us. Because although this is definitely one of Feed Me's least accessible releases, I would not go so far as to call it challenging. And although it's a really good album, I wouldn't call it a masterpiece for that reason, and also the individual critiques that I laid out in my track by track. So I think that at this point, for us to really get a true Feed Me masterpiece, his music really just needs to completely break free of those EDM genre conventions that still feel like a hindrance here. We've gotten a glimpse of it, just a little peek through the keyhole, and I hope that that's what we'll get more of down the line. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Feed Me's new self-titled album. Let me know your thoughts on the album in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this review. You know, if I gave some real insights here, or if I sound like an idiot and you hate it, you know, let me know. And if you did enjoy the review, then I would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing. You don't need to actually do it, just consider it. That's enough for me. Because I would really like to put out more videos like this, more reviews, deep dives, stuff like that. So if that's what you're interested in, just go ahead and click that little subscribe button and the bell as well. Oh fuck, that's what Fantano says. Shit. Click that little subscribe button as well as the bell. That doesn't work either. Click the bell, all that shit, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you real soon.